This is Adeline Redesign. Welcome to part 5 of a series on assembly line style furniture flipping. You don't need to have seen the previous 4 to enjoy this video. What I'll be showing you in this video is how to do a faux finish using concrete and a wood graining tool. This is Henry Feather Finish. It's an underlayment. What I've already done is put a cement board tape on the seams at the top where there was an inlay. You can see inlays in a lot of vintage pieces that have wood veneer. They're also fairly common in pieces that are MDF or laminate with particle board underneath it. The reason for these inlays is often because the trim around the edge is a solid wood piece, and then the inlay is the veneer, MDF, particle board, laminate, etc. Covering water damage using a concrete veneer technique is something that I have not seen anyone do other than myself, but I can guarantee you it works very well. One of the things about concrete is that it cracks. As you can ask any sidewalk in America, concrete cracks with almost no exception, but there are things that we can do to help prevent that cracking. Now, the reason it cracks is brittle. It's strong, but it's brittle. And so we want to add some elasticity. It's not normally what you're looking for in concrete, but it is in our case. So what I have done is added superplasticizers, which is a ingredient you can find that is to be mixed into cement to reduce how much water that you need to put into it. By reducing the amount of water needed, we reduce how much shrinkage there is in the concrete, thereby reducing the risk that it will crack. Additionally is the cement board or shower board tape that you will see in cement boards in showers before tile is put up. It's available at any big store or online, and it looks similar to a mesh tape, and you put it on the seams if you have an inlay. Then you add the concrete on top of that for the first layer, which I've already done in a previous episode here. It's not the most important layer for you to see. The next one is, and that's coming up. I have applied a thin layer of that Henry Feather finish on, and I'm going over it with the wood graining tool, just like you've seen in painting techniques. I remove as much of the excess of that I can before I move on to the next part. And if I don't like what I've just done, I can go back over it. I have maybe 15 minutes of working time, perhaps closer to 10 with this, so I have some wiggle room to change it as I go along. And once the wood graining tool gets too full of the Henry Feather finish underlayment, I will rinse it and scrub it down before I go to the next one. I'm mixing these in small batches, similar to the way you would Bondo. You have a similar amount of working time, though I think normally here you'd have a little more working time than Bondo in my experience. I'd say that that is true. In addition to using superplasticizers and in addition to using the mesh tape along the seams, if you have seams that you need to cover, which is the only reason that you need that first layer is so you cover the mesh tape in the first place. I've also added, there it's in a white and yellow bottle, a concrete fortifier additive. If you want to try this for your own purposes and you have a very sturdy table, you can disregard the superplasticizers and the concrete fortifier, and you have no need for the mesh tape. And I believe that the product will last for a very, very long time. Even if you don't want to use Henry Feather Finish, which is lovely but a little more expensive as far as cement or concrete goes, you can use a sieve to just get the finest amount of the concrete mix that you can before you do this technique. It looks so good, and when it's painted, it's going to look even better. I'm very pleased with it. I haven't seen anyone else use this technique to cover water damage, but I can tell you it works well. If you don't use the additions I did and find that it cracks, you can pretty easily repair the damage. I'm coming in now after it started to dry and doing something very similar to sanding, only using a cloth that is wet. I am wiping back where there are ridges that are especially high. This will save me time in sanding later on. Once the product is a little more dry, but hopefully not all the way dry, I will go back with a sanding sponge and smooth off those rough edges even further than I have. You can see the look is really coming together. The wood grain is showing, and even though it is in gray, it still already looks very much like wood grain. Once it's painted, in this case, I'm going to be doing black, it'll be gorgeous. There it is, a little more dry. It's starting to dry, as you can see.
I just wanted to insert myself into my video for a moment here to ask that you click on like, or if you want to send me $1 via Venmo at Adeline Redesign, you're welcome to do that.
Or you can just keep watching because the content is free by design. The next step is to take these tables to another room where I'll be doing some sanding. I make an effort to avoid getting sanding dust in a couple of areas, and so normally I'm sanding either in my living area, as you see me here, or outside. In my garage and also in my project room, I make an effort, if I'm going to be sanding, not have it be kicking up a lot of dust, because those are places where I like to paint if I'm not outside. A lot of rearranging going on here. Once the concrete has dried a sufficient amount, I'm going to go in with a sanding block, just like you would use in any other furniture project. I'll either be at 100 to begin with, or at 220 until it feels just the way I want it to, and until it looks the way I want it to. Getting these drawers in initially is a bit tricky, and you may find that most drawers feel like a puzzle until you figure out they're basically just a few different kinds of ways they may come together. Going back in here with the sanding block as discussed, I'm putting on my mask at this point because the concrete is dry enough that it's kicking up a layer that I just don't want to be involved with my lungs. Following this, I'm going to wet it down. You'll see what it's going to look like, or get a closer idea of how much the grain is going to show, this faux grain that I've created while covering the water damage. And I couldn't be much more happy with it. I really couldn't. The remainder of the video, though, I'm going to be moving on because this is an assembly line. There it is. Assembly line style furniture flip, and so I have 8 different side tables. These are just 2 of 4 pair that I'll be working on as part of this series, and so part 5 was the faux finish with that concrete wood graining tool, but it will also go on to include priming. I'll be using a shellac based primer. I'll be using my Wagner spray gun to use a spray and roll method. And I use the spray and roll method on that because I have issues with how the paint is being sprayed out. It is very likely user area. It, as I as I just admitted I messed up. I messed up on admitting I messed up. It's very likely user error, so I will not say that the Wagner spray gun is at fault for that. I'm also going to be in a tent fight. I'm going to be in a fight with a paint tent for a while, trying to get it to come together. I eventually will have it put together, but it is a real struggle. Most of those things speak for themselves. So rather than do a voiceover to catalog every moment you see moving forward, I'm just going to let you know that. I'll be priming using the Wagner spray gun, spray and roll method. I'll be having a fight with a paint tent, and moving on from letting you know what's coming up, I wanted to do a deep dive into paint and painting methods. I don't think enough is known about it in beginner tutorials because it makes sense for us to just focus on exactly what we're about to be doing rather than going into a deep dive on the issues. But we can do both. I believe that I can do both. And so if you don't want to know a deep dive on paint, you've seen the majority of the video. Click like if you like, click subscribe if you'd like. You've seen the majority of the videos piece that will show you how to do the faux finish of a concrete using the wood graining tool. The remainder is if you want to feel productive with me, and if you'd like to do a deep dive on paint with me, I encourage you to stick it out. Water-based paint is almost exclusively the kind of paint that is used in furniture. There are going to be very few videos that you find that are tutorials that will include an oil-based paint rather than a water-based paint. And there are a few reasons behind that, but just know water-based paint is the most common kind of paint, and that can either be acrylic or latex when painting with furniture. When painting with anything, water-based paint is acrylic or latex. Water-based paint consists of a few things. It's pigment, a binder, and then water being used as the carrier. There can be other additives, but that's those are the primary ingredients necessary to call something paint, is pigment or color, a binder, the thing that holds it together, or water, which carries all of that. It's when the water evaporates that the color and the binder remain, and you have a layer of dried paint. Binders hold the pigment together to create that paint film. And the binders could be acrylic, vinyl, PVA, or alkylate. Regarding PVA, PVA is polyvinyl acetate, which we normally just call white glue, which is to say that of the three ingredients in a paint, pigment, binder, water, one of those binders can be white glue. So you could make your own paint just using something with pigment, say a very strong coffee or cocoa powder, and water, as well as Elmer's glue or any kind of school glue. And what you have is technically paint. That's not to say that you should put it on furniture and expect it to be very durable, but those are the three main ingredients: water, color, stickiness, that we call binders. Other additives provide specific properties to paint and are usually included. The properties that they can provide vary, but they can include reducing the dry time, they can improve the brush flow, and they can stop mildew or be a fire retardant. It's a pretty long list of additives that may be included to provide different properties. They can inhibit rust is one. They can absorb light. There's a lot of technology behind how we're managing to do that. They can have flattening agents. So you have matte paint, that's often going to be the case in furniture, emulsifiers, defoamers, coalescing agents, anti-static agents. Freeze-thaw stabilizers can be especially important for exterior paints because the temperature changes that happen in those exterior paints really need to be able to have the paint stay stable on the exterior surface, but also if your paint is being stored in a place where it may freeze and then thaw, the freeze thaw stabilizers can help make sure that that paint is still good despite having gone through the experience of being frozen and thawed again, which is more than we can say for chicken. I'd said that there are a number of reasons that water-based paints are the most common in furniture compared to oil-based paints. And it's true, there are few advantages at using water-based paint over oil. Water-based paints dry much quicker than oil-based paints do. The brushes are relatively easy to clean, comparatively speaking, in water and soap. The odor is pretty low compared to oils, and oil-based paints will yellow and when water-based paints will not. For lighter colors most especially, that it's non-yellowing is a very sought after characteristic in paint. Also for water-based paint, there are lower VOCs. You've probably heard that phrase thrown around a lot. Lower VOCs, lower VOCs. What are they even talking about? Well, VOC stands for volatile organic compound. I feel like a volatile organic character that's about to have a fight with a paint tent in this video as I'm going to, but that's different from volatile organic compound. Volatile organic compound, or VOCs, are a group of chemicals that evaporate into the air and they're present in a lot of products that we use around the home. The higher the concentration of VOCs are in a paint, the more risky it is for you to use as far as your lungs are concerned. The more ventilation you'll need, the more likely it'll be that you'll want to be wearing a respirator, and the higher the risk you take of damaging your lungs is. Low or no VOC paints are standards that are set to be interior. There are some paints you'll see that are exterior or interior, and that means the VOCs are low enough that they are approved for interior use. Some paints list themselves as having no VOCs. And if you're in a large city, this seems like a side note, but it's not. If you're in a large city like mine, I'm in Austin, Texas, you may have a city recycling center where they will give away paint that is low in VOCs to people in the area. You can go to the paint recycling store, essentially, look it up in your area, and they will give you paint. It's lovely. I dropped my camera just there. In my area, from what I've seen, the color option at the Recycling Paint Center is some form of white or off-white, which of course stands to reason because they're getting paints donated or brought to the recycling center from large contractors. So the colors are usually interior, well, they're always interior at my area if they're giving them to the public because they need to have low VOCs. They're interior paints that are used on walls, and then they're combined together to make batches large enough to give out to individuals. If you take some of that paint and you add calcium carbonate, which is chalk, you can get it in chalk like you'd use on a chalkboard. It's also available in Tums, though I admit I've never tried to crush up Tums and put it into my paint to make chalk paint. Another place is in beer and wine manufacturing. It is also used calcium carbonate. So if you know someone that is a small brewer or they make wine, they may be able to spare a half a cup of calcium carbonate. Put 2 or 3 tablespoons of that into low VOC water-based paint, and you've got chalk paint. You'll want to cover it with something of a top coat like a water-based polyurethane, but it's a great way to get some very inexpensive paint that you can put on furniture and have it last for a very long time, most especially if you're doing a distressed look where you paint on the chalk paint, sand it off, or do a wet wipe on the edges that you want to look distressed before the paint dries, and then you cover it with water-based polyurethane. It can be the least expensive ways to make a real transformation for an incredibly low cost. If you have other tips for folks on ways to decrease their cost of furniture refinishing, please include those in the comments or include them anywhere at all so that when we're researching, we can find answers to that. I think it should be something that's accessible at a low cost to everyone if we can make that true. Also, I like Diet Dr. Pepper, so I'm going to drink one in the video. The introduction of latex paint in the 1940s really revolutionized the paint industry. It made it possible to produce higher quality water-based paints with more applications being possible. The modern latex that goes into paint is a synthetic polymer. It has unique properties and characteristics, and it's not the same as latex rubber. Don't confuse it for latex rubber. Under the water-based paint umbrella is latex and acrylic. So for acrylic, usually in general, any paint that's labeled acrylic, it has more acrylic polymers than it has latex paint. And because of that, it usually costs more. It provides better adhesion, better durability, better resilience. There are reasons that the cost is worth it in a lot of applications, but it's not normally for walls, but for cabinets, outdoor furniture, interior furniture, it can make a lot of sense. And you'll see the word enamel that's used in paint description to describe acrylic paint when it is especially durable. And then a combination of both water and oil-based paints. I don't know how they made oil and water mix, but they did. That's of note is waterborne alkylate paint. That's the combination of water and oil-based. It creates a durable, high-shine finish. It's easy to apply. It dries quickly. It's very great for furniture, among other things. And of course, furniture is what I care the most about. It's usually easier to clean up than regular alkylate paint. Alkylate paint being an oil-based paint. The alkylate paint uses petroleum-based solvents and requires paint thinner for cleanup. That's just a side note when I say waterborne alkylate paint. It's something that you may see mentioned, and so I wanted to point out what that is. It's a combination of oil and water-based. If you want to know what you have, if it's oil or water-based paint, assuming that it's not an alkylate, waterborne alkylate, that to test whether or not on your wall or your furniture, if it's water or oil-based, you can try digging your thumbnail into it, and if you can make a dent, that's latex. You could also rub a hidden area with a rag that's dipped in rubbing alcohol, and if you can remove that paint, then it's a water-based paint, whereas if it stays put, it's oil-based. I wanted this to be a big deep dive into different kinds of paint and just kind of the details on water-based paints in general. I feel like we've only begun to dive into the surface. I'm glad there's so much left to learn, so much left to go over. I hope you join me for my learning process and hopefully for your edification in the future.